Sharing is Caring by Itslivybear. Chapter 8. Izuku has a nervous breakdown. Midoriya! Izuku blinked as a blur of pink came up to him, stopping just before she could hug him. Uraraka was quick to fret over him, soon joined by several other members of the class. Mido, where have you been? Ashido pouted. We've missed your quiet greenness at the table. It was Wednesday, having taken Tuesday off to rest more, and that meant his classmates hadn't seen him in school for the 2 days everyone else had been back. Evidently, even though he didn't talk hardly at all, people had actually missed him. Yayarosa smiled at him. Welcome back, Midoriya. By way of announcement, I would like to inform and perhaps remind you that the sports festival is in 2 weeks. You weren't here when Aizawa-sensei made the announcement, so just a heads up. Uraraka nodded, grinning fiercely. We're gonna kick ass! Hero training is set to get even harder. Plus, the table was talking about maybe training after school some days if you wanted to join. Izuku blinked. Training? Yeah, he could probably do some training. Make sure the 10-month health training's still stuck. Since he couldn't use One for All that much, he nodded. Yes, he's back. Everyone in your seats. The voice of their teacher startled them from the gathering of the lunch table at the door. Shirazaki had been, apparently, praying for his safe return in the days he was gone, and Hakaguri was much like Mina, with Jiro hanging back, Asui standing quietly with Koda. Before the group fully dispersed, Asui bobbed her head a little. Midoriya, thank you for saving my life, Kyoto. His eyes widened, but instead of waiting for a response, she had already gone to her seat, inconveniently on the opposite side of the classroom from his own, so he didn't get to do more than sit himself. Sure, he and Koda had helped her out of the convalescent zone, but without Shirazaki and Kaminari, she still would have needed medical attention, or more than she had already gotten. He didn't know what had happened after All Might had gotten there, but evidently everyone except him and Aizawa was okay. Speaking of, Aizawa was just as mummy-wrapped as he had been 2 days ago in the hospital, but he certainly looked less creaky than he had when he gently lowered himself into the hospital chair. It's the second day of the week, he sighed, eyes barely visible, but tired as they swept over the class. And you all have far too much energy to rectify that. We'll be spending first period running laps. You all could use the endurance training anyway. There was an immediate outcry of sheer torture they would no doubt be going through, but Izuku breathed a sigh of relief. Laps. Yeah, he could do run laps. They were monotonous and familiar. They all headed to the locker rooms amidst some grumbling to get changed into their gym uniforms when Izuku felt a hand grip his arm and pull him down a side path. He blinked rapidly and flinched back from the red eyes. Welcome back. Bakugo sneered. You missed something fun. Izuku refused to rise to the bait. Bakugo raised an eyebrow. Oh, you don't want to know? That's fine. Thought you'd like to know about your shitty soulmates, but fine. Izuku's eyes widened, and he couldn't help but reach out and grab the other boy's retreating arm. He didn't know what he was feeling, or what he wanted. Was it fear? Anticipation? Hope? Whatever it was, part of him needed to know. Bakugo smirked, knowing he had him right where he wanted him. I know who they are. They go here, actually. Izuku's breath hitched. And imagine, Bakugo drawled, how they'd feel to know it was a useless loser who was attached to them. God, imagine how much shittier you'd feel if you actually told them that all this time you had been hiding because you knew you weren't good enough. I wonder what they thought about your quirklessness, even if you have a shitty quirk now. You didn't before, and everyone knows soulmates don't get your quirk until you do. They probably wondered what you did to trick the universe into giving it to you. Hell, what you did to get soulmates in the first place. I bet they were probably happy before they knew you existed. Izuku was trembling, eyes caught in those pools of vicious red, but Bakugo wasn't done. He leaned in close, his mouth right next to Izuku's ear. And I know who they are. He leaned back, easily prying Izuku's hand off his arm and walking away. I could always tell them, he called back, but where's the fun in that? Izuku could feel his eyes losing focus, staring fearfully at the floor. He heard it for what it was, a threat. Cross Bakugo and his soulmates, whoever they were, would know just how horrible and useless he really was. The fact that they were in the same school was bad enough. They could find him, or he could find them, and then his carefully built house of lies would crumble around him, and everyone would abandon him. He would be betraying Hakagiri and Koda, who thought he was really like them, and not just running away for being a disappointment. And everyone else, they would know that he used to be quirkless, that he used to be a waste of space, reliant only on the quirks of his soulmates that he betrayed, that he ruined just by existing. Anyone who thought he was their friend would be sickened by his lies and cast him out, just like before. And then, oh God, then people might start asking where he got his quirk from, and All Might would be revealed, and it would weaken everything. Izuku felt like he was going to be sick. He should just drop out, convince All Might to take one for all back and find a new successor, one who wasn't so broken and useless, and leave so no one could ever find him. And he wouldn't have to live with disappointing literally everyone. He'd have to leave his mom behind, but that was for the best. So no one would know where to find him, and no one could drag him back to figure out why he left in the first place. Suddenly, he wasn't feeling up for laps. The sports festival was today. He had been fidgeting for weeks, looking for who his soulmates were. If he could find them, he could hide from them, and they'd never know. Bakugo seemed to take vindictive satisfaction at watching him flinch every time someone new used their quirk, only relaxing when it was clear the quirks weren't copy or brainwashing. He just sneered and gave a knowing look that had Izuku turning away, hoping beyond hope that this would end fine and no one would figure out. But now it was the sports festival. All Might's words to show the world he was here ringing in his head, but he could only swallow and shake. If he used this quirk and his soulmates saw, would they know? Would they be able to recognize the power that they had only gotten on the day of the entrance exam? Maybe. Maybe they hadn't really practiced with it. Maybe they had never used it at all, and they wouldn't know. It was wishful thinking, he knew. Midoriya. He was jerked out of his thoughts by Todoroki staring down at him impassively. I'm going to beat you. Izuku blinked and frowned in confusion. Like, in this festival? Maybe it was a competition? But why him in particular? I'm going to come at you with everything I have to prove to my father. Never mind. It's not important. Just know I will beat you. Todoroki just nodded and looked away, ignoring the outcry of the class to face the door again, waiting for them to be called out for the introduction ceremony. The signal came and they walked through the tunnels as a class, Ida trying to keep some semblance of order, but not many people were paying attention to the vice rep, too excited and emotions running high to the oppressive noise of the cheering crowd.
And now the class that fought off villains and made it out alive. Class 1A, the hero course.
The other classes were not announced with nearly as much fanfare, and then it was time for the student pledge. Midnight cracked her whip and called Bakugo to the stand. He looked out across the competition, looking rather bored, before shoving his hands in his pockets and sneering. I'm going to win. You're all just stepping stones to my success. The outcry was significant, and Izuku could only wince. He had set a target on himself along with the entire class, and no one was looking at them favorably now. Gee, thanks, Bakugo. The first course was called an obstacle course, and everyone immediately raced forward at the start, packing themselves into the tunnel to try and get out. And Izuku felt incredibly claustrophobic, just like he had that day during lunch, when the press had broken in. And suddenly he wished the gym uniform had longer sleeves or deeper pockets, because too much skin was exposed. Too many cracks too close. He heard a crackle of ice percolated by a gust of icy air, and he nearly leapt out of his skin, the full body flinch lifting him slightly off the ground before ice could trap him like the rest. With most of the other competitors stuck up to their shins in frozen water, he managed to duck between the crowd to come out of the tunnel to the first obstacle announced by Mike as the Robo Inferno. The 4 types of robots from the entrance exam faced the competitors, 3 different zero-pointers looming over the crowd, looking no less menacing than they did in the entrance exam, and Izuku watched in horror as Todoroki froze 2 of them in unstable position. They creaked before crashing to the ground, the frozen masses cracking on impact and making the field a veritable scrap metal hazard, pierced only by Kirishima and a boy encased in shiny metal. He found a path through the robots and slipped between them before tripping on a cord. He blinked down at it, seeing it was attached to a metal plate, and made a split-second decision. Dropping it to his back, he came across the next obstacle, the fall. It was aptly named, with the only ways across the wide chasm being wires of varying thickness and some pillars of earth. He wasn't entirely sure of his balance, but he watched a cackling, pink-haired girl swing herself across with what looked kind of like a grappling hook or a zip line, and he was struck with an idea. Finding a wire that went all the way from one side to the other and didn't have a lot of give, he gripped 2 opposite sides of the metal plate, wire in between him and the plate, and let himself fall. For a moment, his stomach leapt to his throat, and he was sure he was going to massively regret this. But then he was sliding, flying through the air. The free feeling was soon squashed by the incoming wall, and he could only lean back and bend his knees, hoping his legs would be able to slow him down. The impact jarred him a little, but he managed to shake out his legs at a time before. He didn't think this through. How was he going to get up? After debating for a few seconds, he pulled down on the metal plate so it was tight against the wire before slowly walking himself up sideways until his legs were close enough that he could hook one over the top and use his leg muscles to heave himself back onto solid ground. He only took a moment to breathe, checking the progress of the other people, and saw Todoroki and Bakugo halfway across the next obstacle, neck and neck. It was a minefield. He watched as people would step onto it, only to get thrown back in a pink explosion. They didn't look hurt so much as pushed away, but it gave him an idea. A really reckless, this could kill him idea. He carefully started scooping mines out of the ground and pushing them into a pile. When he had enough to be covered by the metal sheet, and then a couple more for good measure, he took a deep breath and gave himself a running start. He saw stars when the impact shook him into the air. Once he was able to blink his vision clear, he could appreciate the feeling of flying once more. and he looked down. Oh shit. He was coming up on the 2 leads, 3/4 of the way across the minefield, and unless he did something rash and kind of stupid, there was no way he could beat the ice skating and explosions that were propelling the 2 of them. And he had promised All Might that he would make a name for himself. He shifted before his brain could catch up with what he was doing and adjusted the angle of the metal sheet, tilting it forward. It was jarring when the other explosions went off, but it continued his momentum enough for him to get within feet of the edge of the minefield. He tumbled off the sheet and wobbly got to his feet out of the roll, setting it off at a dead sprint, hot explosions and cold air nipping at his neck. His heart pounded in his ears, drowning out all other sounds. He could only hear his pulse, his breathing, and only feel the ground sending tremors through his feet, the feeling on the back of his neck, and only taste the dust and the copper of blood. He must have bit his tongue on the roll, he decided, as he ducked through the tunnel. He was so close. You could see the line on the ground. He tripped. He slid. He could only breathe heavily, scrambling to his feet as the sound came back to the world, like yawning to relieve the air pressure.
Midoriya in first place, followed closely by Todoroki in second and Bakugo in third. What a crazy show!
Izuku took a shuddering breath and tried desperately to ignore the harsh glare and scream from said third place. Round 1 complete.